And now it's time to talk about dive planning.
I love dive planning.
Now that we have a rebreather, we got to plan our dive so we can maximize what we can do.
Yes.
So, one of my favorite dives to do with a rebreather is a long drift dive. Like when we go to Cozumel and hit all those palancar reefs, like back to back to back to back, right? So, we
Yes.
want to go down and stay down for a long time just drifting
Absolutely.
at a one set depth. If
we should
possible.
be there right now.
Right. So, what's your dive? What does that look like?
So look, we're planning as if the dive emergency happens in the worst part of the dive. Now, I use an app, and there's lots of different ones.
Yep.
The one I like, just because it works easy on my iPhone, is iDeco Pro. So I'm going to walk through an example on that one. There's plenty of good ones, plenty that work. But what I want to show you are the things you need to be considering in a dive plan. So let's go here first. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the dive. I'm going down to 100 feet, pretty realistic on a Cozumel drift dive.
Awesome.
But on my rebreather, my little baby Go, I'm going to stay at 100 feet for 90 minutes. You know how far
awesome.
we're going to drift? We're going to be like 5 miles away. It's
Right.
awesome, right? And I'm going to bring 32% nitrox. That's pretty realistic. That'll be
course.
on my back. It's a back-mounted, normal recreational kit. Okay? So that's what I'm bringing. And then that's it. After my 90 feet, I'm going to start coming up. My dive is over. That's the dive I'm going to do. So I set that up in the app here. What do I need to be thinking about? Well, there's a couple of other settings that you need to know about. There's various settings in here. I'm using the Bowman algorithm, and I want you to notice that I have to set up a gradient factor. Okay, so I do a 50, 70, and there's two gradient factors, a low and a high.
Yeah.
Now listen, I did an entire series really revolving around all the advanced features in Shearwater, and it discusses gradient factors. Gradient factors are going to control how close you're getting to the M value and stop you on your deepest part of the dive all the way to your final stop. It's going to control where that is, and it's a form of setting up conservatism.
Correct.
We like 50, 70. We basically like it because, I don't know, smart people like Simon Mitchell, maybe we shouldn't try to outthink him, and Doug
Exactly.
Ebersol. So go watch that series. It'll teach you all about that. Otherwise, this video will be 3 hours.
Right.
Okay? But we already have that out there, and your instructor will talk to you more about that. But you need to set that up, okay? So you're going to go, after you go into your settings, you're then going to come back up to your CCR dive. Let's just look at nothing went wrong. It's a perfect dive.
Right.
My run time on that dive would be 128 minutes.
Great.
It's showing me how much of my CNS clock that I use, which we've talked about in this class, right? So at 1.2 PO2 for a 128-minute dive, I would have used of that clock. How long can I be at 1.2 on a single dive? I would have used 61% of that. Next to it, it shows something called oxygen toxicity units. You have 300 of those assigned to you in a day. And on this dive, I used 148 of those. So I'm fine. Obviously, if my PO2 would have been higher, this is that teeter-tottering, I would have used less of my CNS. I would have used more of my CNS clock.
Right.
But I would have less deco time. So it's a balance. What are you going to
Correct.
do in the day? You got to think about that when you're thinking about your CNS clock. I got to consider my scrubber. Is there any problem doing a 128-minute dive on my Go
Right.
with a brand new scrubber? No, right? Because we have a
Right.
2.5-hour scrubber. You said we're in Cozumel.
Right.
We drifted
Chilling.
warm and chilled. I probably did no work the whole dive.
Right.
And you can actually email this to yourself. So on this app, you can see there's an email button up at the top, and it will literally show you your entire dive. Look at that. It shows you your
Now-
dive, your ascent rate, your deco, and everything. And you can send that to yourself or to your instructor.
Now the question is, especially for new divers going through this training, is, well, I can't even imagine going down to 100 feet and staying there for an hour and a half. Like, what? When you do a single tank dive, you're lucky if you get like 45 minutes at like 60, 80 feet, right? People are pushing it. It's hard to get to an hour even sometimes in these dives, and they're much shallower. What do you mean doing 100 feet for 90 feet? What if things go wrong? Is my tank enough to get me safe?
Well, that is the question. And that's what we're really planning for. But so as you scroll down, you can see the CCR dive, right? 100 feet for 90 minutes. It brought me up to 70 feet for 1 minute. It then brought me up to 40 feet for 1 minute, 30 feet for 8 minutes, 20 feet for 12 minutes. And my final stop, which you set what you want that at, is 10 feet for 16 minutes. And by the way, Shearwater has some advanced functions. One of them is called Gradient Factor 99, and it's showing you the optimal point where the best off-gassing will happen on your final stop.
Right.
Go watch that series.
Right.
Great. I just copied Andy Davis's article, went over that. It was awesome.
So,
but to
if
your
we have
point,
to bail out at the worst possible place.
So let's go. Worst possible time. Right at the worst time.
89 minutes and 59 seconds.
We switched to the CCR bailout tab. Let's look at what I need. Here you can see I need 62 cubic feet of Nitrox 32, which
Perfect.
I have 80 on my back. Remember we told you used very, very little, if any, diluent gas. On a go, your diluent gas is your gas for everything. It's your bailout gas. It's your diluent gas.
Yep.
It's your inflation gas. I mean, how much inflation did I need? I go down to 90 feet. I click that button one time and I'm done. Okay, so here's the dive. It failed at the worst possible time. It's going to now be 169 minutes. I'm going to have to get out of this dive. 169 minutes.
Yeah.
So setting up your proper sac rate. Remember we talked about with your instructor, you're going to learn what your sac rate is. That means how much gas do you breathe per minute,
right,
as a surface air consumption rate, assuming you're panicked and bad things happen. Set up the sac rate conservative, and you'll set that up in the app. Well, here's the dive. 100 feet at 90 minutes, that's when the beep hit the fan. So then I'm going to go to up to 70 feet for a minute. It tells me how much gas I'm using. 40 feet for 2 minutes. It says stop. I'm on my open circuit gas. I'm just breathing open circuit. I already cut everything off. My O2's off on the rebreather. I already got rid of the expanded counter lungs. We've talked about that on emergencies. I've either burped it or squeezed it out, right? No problem. And you're with me because I already told you I'm bailing out. Then, Gus, I'm the bailed out guy. I have to go to 30 feet for 13 minutes. No problem. Then I have to go to 20 feet for 22 minutes. And then the final stop is always going to be the longest, 10 feet for 40 minutes. So when we talk about can you be neutral, buoyant, in trim, you just got to sit there at 10 feet. We don't want you bouncing up and down, right?
Correct.
Stay at that 10 feet. Maybe go a little lower than 10 feet. Maybe go 12. Give yourself a little cushion.
Yeah.
That may change that deco profile a little bit. And it's showing you off to the right what your PO2 was at every single one of those depths. Based on the 32, and it also shows you what your gradient factor was at every single one of those depths. So the message is you have to think about your sac rate, bailing out at the worst time. Do you have enough sorb? Would your oxygen have lasted? And how much of your CNS clock did you use? No problem doing your beautiful, long 90-minute dive at 100 feet in Cozumel. I only needed 62 cubic feet, and I pretty much doubled my sac rate for where it normally is. I'm small. I have a really low sac rate. I just do. Yeah. I doubled it. Some people may say, the only other thing I will add, and it's a fair comment, some people may say they would want you to almost quadruple. Mel Clark says this a lot. For like 3 to 5 minutes at that bailout point, quadruple your sack rate as if you not just had a flood, but maybe you had a CO2 hit.
Yeah, or you're super startled or whatever.
Super startled. So a CO2 hit for sure would make you for probably 3 to 5 minutes breathe maybe even 4 times your sack rate. But for 3 to 5 minutes, that probably wouldn't have added that much.
You have the margin of safety, right? You need only 62 cubic feet. You have 80.
I have 80.
Close to 80.
It wouldn't have, for 3 to 5 minutes, it wouldn't have used up the rest of that gas.
Right.
We're just trying to get you thinking about
Yeah.
planning to dive. But Gus, you didn't want to stay down at 90 feet the whole time. You're like, Woody,
right.
I know at this depth there's also something else cool. So
and
talk about that.
It's important to add also that these numbers are based in our own internal, settings, sack rates and air consumption and all of that stuff. So it could look different for other people. And also it can be different depending on your conservatism, right? And what I mean by that is, are you going to think about, well, what if my buddy's rebreather also fails exactly at 90 minutes or 100 feet, right? He needs to have enough air. And if I have to share it with somebody, there's a third person now that is coming to me and saying I'm out of air. Like, how much are you going to add to your plan and say, well, maybe 60 feet is not enough if I have to also share air with somebody who just ran out of air? And then you start building in, well, maybe I have to bring a stage with a higher percent of nitrox so I can switch to that when I bail out and I'm doing deco, like maybe a 50% mix. And you will work with your instructor to figure out stage rigging and bringing other bottles and things like that if that is a concern. On the flip side, you could see it as something different. You could see it as, I have 60, right? If I have to bail out and I have 60 feet on my back, or what, I need 60 feet on my back, I have 80. You also have 80. Most likely your rebreather didn't break. So not only I have 80 on my back, which should be plenty for the 62 that I need, but you have 82. So I have 160 cubic feet available if we have a real emergency.
Yes, and that's a great point you're bringing up. There's different schools of thoughts out there. And here at Dive Talk, we don't say there's only one school of thought to where do we do our gas planning as team planning, or do we do our gas planning always as if we're diving alone? And if you do it as if you're diving alone, many say you should plan to have 1.5 times the amount of gas that you actually need. Right. So in this case, if I needed 62 cubic feet and I multiplied that by 1.5, I probably would need 90 feet. That means I can get 1.5 divers out, right? But I already doubled my sack rate.
Right.
I already was unbelievably conservative. So having that 80, in my opinion, where I went really extreme on my sack rate, is probably pretty good. And I don't solo dive. Mm-hmm. However, I get it. Maybe we got separated, so I understand that. But to your point, we dive in a team. We would have stayed together.
Imagine
we would
if
have
there
had
were
100
people, 4 people on rebreathers. Now you have everybody has 80. Like, there's so much gas if we stay together, right?
And we talk about conversion. Like, if you see somebody in the team, give a thumbs up. We say as rebreather divers, converge on that diver. Don't touch them.
Yeah.
Leave them alone, but be around them. Stay with them as a group.
Ready to go.
And help. Everybody's there to help. It's a known sort of protocol that we do. So that's a great point
Swarm
you brought
the victim.
up.
Yeah. So you can add safety by numbers, of course.
Yes.
Okay, so in my plan, I decided to go a step beyond. I thought that 90 minutes wasn't enough. Like, I have a rebreather that can go longer, so why not go all the way? So I am doing your dive, 90 minutes or 100 feet. But then I'm going a little bit up in the reef or the wall to 60 feet, and I'm going to take a 30-minute dive at 60 feet. Like, I'm just going to finish by doing a dive, maybe some swim throughs at 60 feet, just 30 more minutes.
Okay.
In that case, as you can see on your screen, my total dive, if I don't have to bail out, it's 151 minutes, which is pretty close to the rating on the go of 150 minutes. But again, we're in Cozumel. It's not a strenuous dive. So if you go up by 1 minute, you'll be fine.
Okay.
Right? So 151 minutes.
Realistic.
151-minute dive, uneventful, beautiful dive.
Okay.
2.5 hours, 90 minutes at 100 feet, 30 minutes at 60.
I could see us doing that dive. That would be very realistic.
Now, worst case scenario. Yeah. Worst case scenario, we have to bail out. If I have to bail out on my dive, which is super long, okay, the total dive time will be 186 minutes.
Okay.
So it will be over 3 hours long because I have to bail out. Of course, the 3 hours I won't be on the rebreather because I bailed out. That's the whole
And you bailed out probably after the worst part of the dive, so you're not going to be on the open circuit bailout gas for that 186 minutes.
No. I bail out at the 121-minute mark, so 2 hours in, so I'm nowhere near the SORP limit in the go or anything like that. So 121 minutes in, 2 hours and 1 minute in, my rebreather explodes.
Okay.
So I have to bail out to open circuit.
Okay.
Now, here's the weird part about this. Even though the dive is longer, because I spend all that time at 60 feet off gassing, I only need 46.7 cubic feet of nitrox.
You're off gassing there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I will need less nitrox if I bail out, but I'm spending obviously a lot of time doing deco, but at shallower depths. So I'm fine. So
what you're telling me is we're better off diving longer on your dive than my one shorter deep dive. That's
correct. Great. So I would do just 1 minute on the ascent to 60, or from 60 to 30, from 30 to 20. Then at 20 feet, I would sit for 22 minutes, just breathing nitrox. And then I will go up to 10 and spend 41 minutes. So that's a longer deco. So I spend a lot of time in deco at shallow depths, but because I'm so shallow, I only need 46.7 cubic feet. So even with the 1.5 calculation of bailing out 1.5, I will be okay with 46 cubic feet.
Awesome.
With an 80 tank.
Now, I will tell you, if you're going to plan some dives that are dives where, for example, let's say it's a wreck dive, and there's a boat tied off to the wreck. I'm just adding some other things to think about. Many times they will either tie off at 20 feet 100% oxygen for somebody that may have to bail out. Do you know how much less deco you would have had in that case? Now, we did the worst case. We didn't bring nobody has 100%.
Nobody's helping.
Nobody has 50%, right? And we were fine. But now you added 100% oxygen to 20 feet. That's going to cut that deco down. Well, first of all, you're going to be at 1.6 at that 100 feet. You would use more of your CNS clock. But if you ran that number in iDeco Pro, it would show you how much better off you are by bringing 100% oxygen. Many of your instructors will talk about that. We never cave dive, for example, without bringing a 40 cubic foot cylinder of 100% oxygen. We park it right at 20 feet, whichever cave we're in, because we know when we get there, we switch. We already set up our dive computer to say, hey, we also have 100%. And when you switch to that, your deco time goes way down. So think about that kind of stuff also in your dive planning. Do you really only want to have 80 cubic foot of, in this case, it was 32%.
Yeah.
Right? Those higher oxygen mixes, but then you've got to be very careful that you absolutely don't use those other gases below their maximum operating depth or you can convulse. I happen to know that if you brought 50% with you as well, that can't be used deeper than 70 feet.
Correct.
So you mark on those tanks the percent of gas that's in them, of oxygen, and the MOD in big giant letters, and we identify for each other. If you're switching to that, I look at you doing it, I trace that back to you, and I'm like, yes, that's the right one. You can now use that. We're at the right depth. You got to be really careful with this, and you'll learn that kind of stuff when you get with your instructor, and they may have you practice switching to
as they progress in the training.
But they may have you say, okay, on this bailout, you're going to go to a place where there's a platform, for example, and bail out. They may put 100% oxygen there at 20 feet and have you practice your bailout with that, and you would have set up your iDeco Pro or your gas planning software to say, oh, by the way, I have this gas as well. You won't believe how much less gas you will need at that point.
You know, the coolest part about this whole thing is if you do my dive 151 minutes and it goes as planned, which 99.999% of the dives go as planned, you get back on the boat after 2.5 hours, 2 hours and 31 minutes with a full aluminum 80 on your back.
Unbelievable.